A lot of top players are complaining that this patch is just about hero augment rerolls, or reroll one of the really OP things like RE Scholars. Is there any room for anything that isn't just this or 4-cost lottery? Well, in this episode of In Too Deep, we're gonna hop on board with K3soju, who is actually popularizing an off-meta blaster reroll comp. It features some unpopular carries like Hui and Ezreal and using them as a duo in order to get a bunch of free wins and post a 1.x masterclass? Is this for real, or is this just another streamer clickbait title? Let's dive in and look at these allegations very closely. Let's go over the general game plan and talk about why blasters and what makes them effective. The first thing to note is that blasters are buffed this patch, so now people are paying attention to them, and rightfully so. They actually can do a lot of damage and win. Another element is that people are discovering that 4 Vanguards are really cheap and effective, and much better than rolling for a 2-star 4 cost like Nasus or Taric or anything like that. That feels like really hard to hit to stabilize. And instead, you could play 4 Vanguards, which are really cheap. And there's so many Vanguards, it feels like you can't really get griefed on them as long as you 2-star a bunch of them and play around Mordekaiser as your main tank. It's pretty uncontested, but that's for now. I see a lot of people actually changing that, and perhaps this video might influence how often it's played. But I do think that it's pretty easy to hit because of how uncontested it is. The other thing I really like about it is that it has a dynamic game plan. You can play an AP and AD line, or maybe AP only. You can dual carry Ezreal, or maybe you go for 4 and 5 costs instead, and if you're not finding the Ezreal because it's contested by portals. Or you can even play Rumble with the hero augment and try to carry Rumble with it as well, since he is a blaster. It's simple yet satisfying to play. It's just like 4 Vanguards and 4 blasters, so pretty straightforward board. And yet it does feel like it has a good payoff. And as we mentioned, that it can go first really often, as noted by K3soju getting 3 first places in one sitting and actually like rattling off all those wins while kind of piling up a bunch of LP and climbing the top 10. Here's a general game plan of how to approach the comp. Hold every Vanguard and upgrade your backline. You also could just play the blaster straight up in your backline. Like if you open up Ezreal and Hui, you can just play them plus Vanguards. But I think that they can sometimes struggle to kill things if they don't have items. And it's really cheap to get things like Warwick 2, Blitzcrank 2, and another Vanguard to potentially snowball your frontline momentum, and your opponents can't kill them fast enough. If you have 80 items like Deathblade, Last Whispers, Infinity Edge, etc., you play around things like Hunter. So an example could be Twitch and Kog'Maw, and these link into adjacent traits like Frost and Honeymancy. If you have AP opener, play around things like Scholar and other AP like mages, maybe enchanters. A really common setup is Zoe, and Zoe is a portal that ties in with Galio. You can have like that as your opener, or maybe just play Zoe Ari, which is a really common opener right now. In stage 3, roll for upgrades and go for 4 Vanguards plus backline units. A general rule is that your items holder should be upgraded. So if you have items on Blitzcrank in the very beginning, try to make sure Blitzcrank's upgraded. If you have items on Kog'Maw, roll until you have Kog'Maw 2, things like that. And then stage 4, you level to 7 and you slow roll above 50 gold for 3-star 3 cost of some kind. Or if you're playing for another alternative carry, like maybe Rumble, you can roll on 6, but I still like rolling on 7 because you get 4 Blaster, 4 Vanguard. And then you push levels and add 4 and 5 costs. Here's an example of how the core units actually map out of the line. So level 4, you start off with something like, 200 to Vanguard. Then maybe you add in a Frost unit or perhaps a Honeymancy unit. Very flexible. Let's say you pick up a Hui at this point. Level 6, you then go for like 4 Vanguard plus backline. So in this case, it's 2 Vanguards here, the 2 backline, and you just add 2 more Vanguards. Then level 7, you start to prepare the transition until you hit things like Tahm Kench. Maybe you're playing that Blitzcrank 2 and the Warwick 2, and they're holding items. Then you sell them for these units, and you can replace them while tagging in the 4th Blaster, which is Varus. And you have a bunch of hanging traits that you might notice. So for example, you have 2 Portal here. If you don't have that 4th Blaster, you can go ahead and play things like a 3 Portal. You also have Arcana with Tahm Kench, so maybe you play Ari or you play Hecarim. There's a lot of different things you can do until you get that core unit together. A level 8, an example you can play is Smolder, especially if you have an extra blaster. And level 9, you can insert things like Xerath, maybe a Nora if you want to go for Portal and, make a Yuumi link to one of your carries. There's a lot of different things you can do in this slot. Here's an example AP variation, which is kind of similar to what we just did, but let's say you have items on Zoe 2 with like Blue Buff and Nashers, and that's item holding for Hui. And we're playing around Portal here, and then we add an Ari for Scholar. Maybe we add in Rumble at 6 and we take out Ari for a Vanguard, or maybe we hit RE2, we move items to RE2 instead to hold Blue Buff Nashers. And remember, during this entire time, if you hit Hui instead and you play Hui 2 or Ezreal 2, you can actually just replace your unit straight up. This is just an example of how to play a very straightforward staircase strategy, so that way you're not just trying to hard force it from all 1-star board and then getting wiped out. And then from here, it's pretty much the same exact thing. The type of augments that you should consider are things that give you either a lot of straight combat power or things that give you a lot of items. The reason why is because in a standard game of TFT, usually you get enough items to itemize 1 full carry and 1 full tank. So to do a carry, you need 3 more full additional items, which is not going to be very common. And so you usually get it through augments. Starting from silvers, an example of a 3-cost power-up that you want to focus on is Triforce, and this encourages you to dual carry Ezreal and Hui alongside reroll Mordekaiser. Pandora's Bench is just a really good reroll augment in general and really powerful for 3 costs because it lets you use it early for a bunch of units that you don't want, and you can just kind of hold it. Like, let's say you're at 33 gold, just hold that extra 3 cost. And you can even use it to roll like 2 costs and 4 costs as well, which is really nice. Component buffet is really nice, so you can get perfect items and you don't have to worry about like, oh, do I like, go for blue buff versus Shojin and try to slam this for tempo, or do I greed? You just get it, which is really, really good. And that also means that Pandora's items can be really powerful too. Unified resistance is generally really strong to make sure your front line is sturdy. The better your front line is, the more you're going to be able to amp up that damage. Shields up is actually one of the best Vanguard frontline things in general because it just means that they can't get stunned, and that means that they'll be able to cast and stun your opponents in response, which is really huge. Molten Caramel, we mentioned, is really good in the stats and probably one of the best ways to play Rumble carry as well as play Preservers. In fact, the most recent tier list shows that Molten Caramel was probably played in a different setup, and that might gradually change as more people catch on to this build. So this might actually be more cutting edge. Spellblades and High Voltage are just good gold augments in general, and Spellblades gives you a ton of damage. High Voltage gives you a lot of tempo, and one of those items that you don't have to build naturally. +1 Blaster actually is surprisingly pretty good because you can get 6 blasters as your win condition on 8. You just throw in Smolder, but that is a little bit tricky to find Smolder. So maybe you end up putting Blaster Crown on someone else and then kind of waiting for Smolder in the late stage of the game. Giant Mighty is really good to get your Vanguards even tankier. Buried Treasure 3 because you just need tons of items in order to itemize a 3rd unit. Support Golem 2 is just still broken, and also the support items are just very good in general for things like Vanguards and even the Blasters. The item build that you're looking for with this composition is to itemize AP items on Hui and AD items on Ezreal. Now, you might notice that both of them share best in slot with red buff, and that is important to note that you only want one of them to have red buff. But red buff is also really hard to get because bow is one of the most contested components in the game, if not the most. And same thing even with blue buff. Tiers are really hard to get, especially with so many people playing other things like reroll scholars. And so a lot of times you end up having things like Shojin, Nashers, and like Morello instead of having like True Best. So one of the things about these compositions is you can't really get the best in slot unless you're playing Pandora's and Component Buffet. So keep that in mind. If you do end up having red buff on Hui, then probably just don't put this on Ezreal. Or in the best case scenario, I personally really like Death Cap. Death Cap is fantastic on Hui, and you get that bonus damage. You can maybe remove on Hui and put it on Ezreal in the late stage of the game and let Ezreal hit more units. Ezreal is just much better with red buff and anti-heal than Hui is, simply because he just hits more things. But in the end, you just slam whatever you can get and make sure that your items just all make sense. If you do end up primary carrying Ezreal, just keep in mind that armor reduction is really important, and so Last Whisper can be good for him. If you don't have Last Whisper on him, then go for Even Shroud on your tank. And then Ezreal ends up being pretty flexible with Shojin as well. If you do end up getting the Blaster Crown, just slam it on Ezreal and just watch him cast a lot. Ezreal's build actually is pretty reminiscent of how he was built in set 10 with Heartsteel Ezreal, which you would, have a big shot and cast huge AoE. So just basically draw inspiration from that if you played that set. There were builds with Shojin, there were builds with Red Buff, there's build with Deathblade, IE, things like that. Mordekaiser's best in slot is pretty specific and kind of hard to get because you really need like a lot of the same components. Things like, Crown Guard and Spark are going to be hard if you're going for like Deathcap and Morello. And Warmogs kind of uses, double belt, same thing as like other double components, just harder to build. So a lot of times you end up slamming like whatever defensive items that makes sense. And also Mordekaiser sometimes it's just relegated to utility. I've seen people play like Sunfire Spark plus like Redemption or something like that on Mordekaiser and just hold like whatever. And then you just build like a good tanky front line in general with a bunch of Vanguards to kind of strengthen numbers. So don't always feel like you have to go for Abyss Mordekaiser, just kind of play whatever you can get. I do want to shout out a few artifacts that are really good on Mordekaiser in particular. Unending Despair is a Ord artifact that is quite good on Mord. So if you open it, that is maybe a green light for you to try to play Vanguards this game and maybe think about the Blaster backline. Focus Mail is just really solid and gives you gold generation, and Mordekaiser procs it very consistently, maybe even multiple times per fight. So ends up being good with Shimmer Scale Essence. And then Eternal Winter is just very cringe and still very good on Vanguards, and ends up slowing down a bunch of attack speed carries like Rise and Callista. The portal that Soju is playing on is Gold Subscription, and he's already in peak form because you can only barely see below his eye line, which means that Soju is right now in his comfort zone. He opens tier, which is really important of a component because it just makes it very likely that he's going to be able to make a mana item if he wants to play around Hui or an AP unit to start things off. And he's holding every unit but Lilia, and that's fine because he's trying to play around Vanguard frontline anyways. So if you're playing around Vanguards, you don't need to hold Bastions. So you can see that he's already starting off with like a Vanguard frontline, and he's probably going to just hold a bunch of pairs and see what he can 2-star first. So Warwick and Namzi make a lot of sense, and he has a Twitch to kind of go along with it, so he can dish the multi-strikers as such. But he drops Ezreal and Hui pair, and so this is already kind of a green light for him to kind of start thinking about playing that line. Let's go ahead and pause here and analyze his augments. Common Bandages is okay. It's always a safe pick to start things off, and it's fine, but it's not that terribly exciting. I personally think that's a little bit understated, but it ends up having some pretty decent synergy with frontline synergies that give you things that combo well off of HP. So Vanguards, for example, give you durability, and durability is damage reduction. That's the new keyword of the set. So it ends up having good synergy there. So that's an option. Tiny Titans is something that only is good if you want to like lose streak. I view Tiny Titans as like an econ augment, and I don't think it's really applicable here because you can interpret it as like I will have more HP so I can like econ up and effectively hit my comp. But I'd rather just have gold as opposed to HP because that gold gives me more options and I get to roll and save that HP without losing carousel pick priority. Item grab bag is also pretty fine because you can actually use everything with AD and AP items, which ends up being really nice. If you get Last Whisper, you just lean towards AD. If you get things like Shiv or AP, you just lean that way. Soju rerolls options 1 and 2 and gets Young Wild and Free and Silver Spoon. Young Wild and Free is better once you understand the position you're at for the carousel pick priority. There's a pretty good chance with like all 1-stars, he's playing like 1-star Hui, 1-star Ezreal, and like 1-star Vanguards, that he might actually be first pick anyways, which kind of reduces the value of it. But it's really good at 3-2 because for the stage 3 and stage 4 carousels, they can be really high impact. For stage 3, it could be like that crucial component. And for stage 4 and 5 onwards, you can get like that 5 cost that you really need to cap your composition. That's not really that important right now. And I don't even think the 2 gold really does anything. Silver Spoon is effectively 10 gold in the form of EXP, which actually can be kind of nice to set yourself on a win streak. But I feel like there's a couple difficulties around it. The first is that you're going to be leveling up to 4 very quickly and potentially 5, which means you have a reduced chance of hitting the 1-cost upgrades of Vanguards. And if he's playing like Namzi pair, Twitch pair, like the 2-stars of those backline units. And so Silver Spoon can actually be kind of tricky, which it can sabotage you by like effectively power leveling. And then you're less likely to hit your 1-cost pairs. I mean, you still probably end up 2-starring them a good amount of time, but just keep that in mind. So I think item grab bag makes a lot of sense here. Plus, it gives him a lot of strong direction on what he wants to be building towards for the carousel. He does a quick scout and looks like he goes for item grab bag. His first round charm is all your items transform into static Shiv, and this affects every component. And so if he wants to go for a pretty strong win, Shivanate is one of the strongest stage 2 and early stage 3 augments you can get because he gets 3 Shivs. You're up 3 items over your opponent. He chooses not to do that, and I think this is because he's not valuing necessarily the win streak. If you end up winning your first fight, you feel like you're somewhat committed to try to win the second fight, and I think based off his opening board and the way he's holding his pairs, he's not entirely sure. And in fact, he can actually do something else, which is if he ends up winning this fight, maybe he just buys Shivanate anyways for the next fight because it won't affect this fight. And that ends up being one thing where he like wins this fight and guarantee wins the second fight because he has Shivanate. Finds Warwick 2, so he can replace some of these portal units with Vanguards. So he has Warwick 2 and Mordekaiser, a very effective combination. And he also has the option of making gold, I believe, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But I think he has to actually sell everything and sell all of his Vanguards. So he might end up just, selling those units to simplify his bench space and then not actually make 10. He's a little bit poorer than some other people. Looks like other people are making a lot of economy. And this is because he got dropped like double 3 cost orbs right before the 2-1. And so that dynamic of him getting those units a little bit earlier is a little bit at the cost of economy. So that's something to keep in mind. He's going to be poorer than usual. This is actually kind of a little bit of an interesting dynamic that Soju's in. He can actually play for either a 1-star Mordekaiser, an upgraded Blitzcrank, or for Frost. But it's important to keep in mind what his win condition for his fight is, which is his main damage source is a little bit of support from Ezreal and Hui, but it's mainly around Warwick with Sunfire. The longer Warwick stays alive, the more he's going to burn. And so he actually wants to just play a strong frontline with Vanguard over Frost. And also if he plays Swain, he can't make 10 gold. So I think Swain here is bait. The debate is whether or not you actually feel like Blitzcrank 2 is better than Mord 1. Mord's a little bit more damage oriented, while Blitzcrank is more stalling. I think that if we had a way to put Sunfire on the Blitzcrank 2, that would be the strongest board, but it's pretty debatable here. I think that ultimately I would probably field Blitzcrank 2 just because I like upgrades and more HP, but I think Mord 1 here is perfectly fine as well. Soju is evaluating like the shapeshifter health is like worth going for whatsoever, but I don't think that it really makes much sense here. It's nice that he's going up against an all 1-star board, so this should be a free, easy win. And now he has pretty good options on the carousel because he can pick up a tier for a blue buff, he can pick up a sword for a Shojin, or he can go for a bow for a Nashor's. The only thing is that he can't really make a Morello because he already has Sunfire from item grab bag. Soju looking up the stats. I mean, I think this is what a lot of good players do. You gotta sometimes just double check your work, make sure that your ideas at least have some good theory behind it. Soju's third pick looks like he's gonna go for a sword, and that's also good because it's on a 3 cost. You can't get blue buff, slam a mana item as soon as you can, and start working towards Hui. You can also slam this Shojin on Ezreal as well and lean towards playing around AD centric, but I personally think Hui's a little bit more consistent. Plus, the thing about Hui is that he's more versatile with his itemization, I feel. I think Ezreal kind of wants strictly red buff and AD, and if you put Shojin on Ezreal, he performs noticeably worse, versus Shojin and blue buff don't have that big of a difference on Hui. And I also feel like Hui does more early game consistent damage because he ends up focus firing while Ezreal's like a big giant AoE. There's a huge amount of chance that Ezreal ends up leaving a lot of units barely alive because he's unupgraded and, you know, he's not actually focus firing compared to what Hui is doing. He does end up playing 4 Vanguard for this turn, and finding Rumble is really huge for that reason, so he can go for a Blaster plus Vanguard. And now you start to see like how Soju's spot looks really good. In fact, because he has upgraded Vanguards with Sunfire, he has multiple sources of damage. How does anybody have the DPS to take down 4 Vanguard this quickly while also trying to get access to the Hui? And Hui is going to be able to just wail away or whale away from the safety of the backline. Okay, it's a free win here, so it looks like it's going to be a 4 streak, so Soju's off to the races here. Good start. Okay, easy win, and now we pick up a Mordecai's Repair, which is really good. The interesting thing about Soju's spot is that he actually doesn't even have to roll on 6 very much because he doesn't have like backline units to roll 4. He's not playing around like, you know, a Twitch pair and a Namzi pair, or, you know, the Zoe portal or anything else that makes sense in the early game. He basically is just going to level and most likely either play another Frost units or like, you know, maybe just an Ezreal. Instantly slams Nashor's, by the way, off of his itemization because Shojin Nashor's is a really good combo. Get a bunch of mana with Shojin, get the Nashor's to give you attack speed post cast, very good synergy, and the stats on Nashor's is AP. Oh, Shoju's actually thinking about slamming Guardbreaker here, and Guardbreaker is often seen as a hybrid item because it just gives you damage amp, or bonus damage is what we called it in previous sets. This is another keyword that's been introduced to TFT. Damage reduction is now durability. Damage bonus is now called damage amp. So you can actually get damage amp for 3 seconds, and so that's like universally just, you know, scaling both AD and AP. But Guardbreaker actually leans a little bit more towards AP because it gives you 10 AP in addition to attack speed and crit. And that's changed because Guardbreaker in the past, like in set 8 or whatever, it also gave AD. And so Guardbreaker leans a little bit more towards the AP units. And Soju's also on a 4 streak, so he's thinking about trying to find ways to continue that streak. So I think slamming Guardbreaker here is entirely reasonable. He also has 42 gold. He can also pick up the Charm here to get Unstable Treasure if he really feels like he wants to win. And there's 2 100 HP streakers in his pool. He might actually wait to see what happens before he makes his decision to slam. Okay, so he's queued up against a level 6 player, so it's too late for him to buy the Treasure Hunter, but what he will do is slam this Guardbreaker. Opponent's board, who's 100 HP streaking, is not killing a single Vanguard. Okay, Blitzcrank finally died, but just goes to show you the power of these upgraded Vanguards. And the 3-item Hui to get the snowball rolling because you protect Hui 1 for so long, he's going to eventually kill everything. Let's go ahead and pause here and talk about what Soju might be thinking about. Band of Thieves is kind of similar to what we talked about, which is just giving you more items. But the thing about Band of Thieves is that it itemizes an off tank or an off carry. And Band of Thieves is probably best played on Galio or Rumble, just like units that are more likely to be upgraded for one, and don't really mind just having extra stats on them in general. I don't really feel like it's that effective right here because he doesn't really have a good unit to put it on. Partial Ascension is okay because you're playing 4 Vanguard, so you're trying to stall a little bit of the fight. But I think that Partial Ascension falls off really heavily towards the late stage of the game because the fight is often decided by 15 seconds. 15 seconds of combat usually lasts early game because people just don't have their items and their augments all online, so the fights stall out. So it's something that can help him right now, but I think that's going to fall off later. And Soju is like, at 96 HP streaking, so I feel like he doesn't actually have to rely on this for a combat augment. Fine Vintage is just off the table. This is much better in set 11 when there's a lot of encounters to give you extra items. But right now, I think Fine Vintage at 3-2 is very risky because he has no items on the bench. Just as a general note, you probably play Fine Vintage as like a 1 or 2, maybe 3 support item silver augment, which is entirely reasonable. You don't really need to do more than that. Compared to like the crazy, 8 support items, ZZ Rot, Heavenly setup that we did from the previous sets. Oh, interesting. So Soju actually rolls options 1 and 3, so he holds on to Partial Ascension. That's totally fine. I mean, there's value in it right now to keep him streaking. And so instead he gets Exiles and Item Ladder. Starting with Exiles actually has some pretty decent synergy again with Vanguards because it gives Vanguards more HP, and also it triggers, I believe, their durability because you get the shields on it. And so Exiles actually has some really good synergy with Vanguards. Item Ladder is something that can be good, but it ends up being something that is less reliable as you get deeper into the game because you want to have consistent 3 items on your carries and tanks. And sometimes Item Ladder just ends up giving you something that's useless. So you're just playing 2-item carry and end up losing fights because of it. So Item Ladder is kind of mid. It's a very fun augment, though, I have to say. And I feel like Item Ladder ends up being a lot better if you have something like Golden Remover or other ways to kind of fill things up, like maybe Emilio or Portal. I don't really think it's that applicable right here, so I'd rather skip it. If we're going to be choosing Exiles, though, that means we probably reroll the middle option for Partial Ascension and see something is slightly better than that. But Exiles is definitely one of the strongest combat augments I think we can get here. Soju actually spaces out his champions and he's looking at Vanguards, and I think this is an important thing to highlight. Vanguards gain 10% durability while shielded, and Exile gives you that shield. So it's just like, really nice to have that synergy with Exiles, and you get that combat start shield, which is nice. You get to stack it on top. Now that I think about it, Vanguard is basically Exiles. You get a shield for 10 seconds. That's exactly what Exiles does. So, okay, maybe there's a little bit less synergy there, but the point still stands that it's just really good, effective HP for the Vanguards. He rerolls it and gets Recon Bob. He's not taking Recon Bob. Sorry, guys. It's a funny augment, but not really a serious one when you're trying to climb. He ends up playing Frost as the other unit, and I actually really like that he does something quite subtle. He puts his Twitch a little bit ahead in the 3rd row of Hui, and that's because if the front line ever cracks or a unit dashes to the back line, it's more likely that Twitch intercepts that and takes damage before the Hui, because Twitch is just a pure synergy bot, so if he dies, he dies. But if they get to the back line and for whatever reason start attacking the Hui before the Twitch, that's a pretty bad situation. So I think it's a really subtle thing, but a really good play here from Soju. Oh, interesting. Soju actually rolls here to see his next charm in his shop, which actually ends up being really impactful because he rolls again and gets a Twitch 2. And this is good because he had multiple pairs to roll for. And yeah, he might lose a little bit of econ. In the worst case scenario, he actually loses here and he can't make 50. But the chances of him getting a good combat charm in stage 3 to keep his streak would make up for that econ loss. And so I think that's actually a really good play. And, that's him thinking about the set mechanic a little bit more holistically, as opposed to just like, well, this is the charm. Do I buy it? Do I take it? And then you just kind of, set and forget until the next charm shows up. He's actually dynamically thinking about his stage. And this is one of the things I really like about charms in general, that I think it really challenges the way you use your shop refreshes in ways that you didn't in other sets, because you just didn't really have a reason to roll on off-level intervals. In the past, you basically just didn't roll on 3-3, you didn't roll on 3-6, you didn't really roll on some of these other like weird turns. But now I think in set 12 you do, and I think that's a really good thing about the set mechanic. There's some other things I don't like about the set mechanic, but I want to compliment it when I see that it's a pretty interesting thing. Speaking of interesting, by the way, so you just hit Mordekaiser 2, so everything is looking really good. He actually checks to see how many turns away he is from his charm. He saws that he's 1 turn away. He gets Crystal Ball, so it shows who he's going to play next. He can deliberately position into that. So, for example, he can move his Hui on the other side and position farther away. He instead chooses to keep Hui on the same side. Hui targets the 3 closest units, I believe. So this is him deliberately trying to also lean into the carry. So I think this is actually wise of him to do so. Plus, it's a Cassid in 1. I don't think he has anything to be afraid of. So ends up winning very handily. And now he's on the verge of 9 streaking very comfortably, despite playing Hui 1 and not having to lean into just an alternative item holder. Very impressive. He ends up finding a Zillion and replaces that because it just has more utility than Twitch. Twitch is just pure damage. Zillion can at least stun with the bomb. He also checked how many rolls he is away from his next charm, and it's 2 rolls. The reason why it was 1 roll is because that other charm actually rolled his shop. This time he's 2 rolls, so instead of spending 4 gold for it, he's not going to do it. Plus, it looks like some of his scouting pool, like the matchmaking that he has up against some of the other players, aren't that strong, and so he ends up feeling like he's likely to 9 streak here. It is kind of close though. Shivanate we talked about is very powerful, but it just seems like his front line's a little bit too strong, and perhaps maybe some static Shiv RNG fell his way, not actually zapping his backline that often, so ends up being quite good. Soju finds an immediate Vanguard replacement and moves his items to Mordekaiser 2 because Mord is the best Vanguard tank that he could afford. Mord is actually a better tank than Tahm Kench. Tahm Kench is often thought about as a CC unit, like he's utility, and not actually a tank. Tank is supposed to be someone that can absorb damage and repeatedly take a lot of hits. Tahm Kench is more like a cast and get out of the fight as soon as possible. So we got a bunch of gold. Looks like we're just buying the first charm that's available to us, which is giving Mordekaiser a lot of HP. Usually in these kind of roll down situations, if you can take something that's pretty cheap and effective, it gets it out of the way, so it's not taking a shot slot. Sometimes you don't want to actually take something that's expensive though, like if you get something that's like, you know, costing you 5, 10, 15 gold for an uncraftable emblem, that's just way too expensive and impractical. So don't just buy the first charm possible. Be a little bit discretionary about how you spend your gold that way, but you know, having something that's like a minor benefit that also is very cheap is really good. He rolls until he basically hits 2-star across the board, 2-star Hui, 5 copies of Hui, and now techs in that 4 Blaster and 4 Vanguard. And pretty much the game is set in stone. He's in 10 streak, and like his board is looking really good. Let's go ahead and pause and talk about these augments again. In general, explosive growth is like much more for like fast 9 strategies, and that's just not really common in the current meta. So it's like a rare take, but I could see it being better in a slower meta, just not right now. Support Golem is generically insane. It's just always something to take. In Vanguards in particular, you get a lot of benefits from like support items like Lockets or Randuins. You get Gem to slow things down, a bunch of damage. Moonstone is also good to just give you a bunch of that defensive energy. The thing about Support Golem in particular that makes it weaker though here than usual is that you have Exiles, and Exiles means that you have to have a space between your units. And so support items are actually weaker in an Exile situation that normally forces you to spread out. So surprisingly, I think Support Golem is not the pick here. That ends up being quite weaker than usual. If you have to play Support Golem, but you lose 2 spots in your Zeeks, 2 spots in your Lockets, or you can't use Randuins whatsoever, there's just a lot of anti-synergy, and you go down in Augment. So you kind of lose the whole purpose of what makes Support Golem really good. Long Distance Pals is interesting. It's actually a little bit awkward with Hui and Ezreal in particular, because you end up having 2 units linked, and they share AD and AP with each other, but they kind of don't really use the other parts of the traits. Like, who cares how much AD Hui has when he's just throwing lightning bolts and how much AP Ezreal has? I mean, I guess he scales a little bit off of that damage. Instead, you'd probably do long distance pals with units that are similar in terms of their damage types. I'd probably long distance pals Mordekaiser and Hui, but that also somewhat restricts your positioning due to exiles. I just think long distance pals is really awkward here, so I'd be surprised if he takes it. That being said, I'd probably roll the first 2 options and hold on to long distance pals just to make sure that I have something. So let's roll 1 and 2. Ooh, these are not really good choices here. Soju just rolled Reinforcement, and he's playing a 3-cost reroll strategy. Reinforcement only be for Tahm Kench 2, so it doesn't really do much. It's basically just a big amount of econ for only one specific unit. I guess he could use reinforcement for Varus. It just doesn't really power spike his board in a meaningful way. And yeah, like it's just interesting that you'd rather have heroic grab bag than reinforcement here. Duo Q, same thing actually. It's basically like another reinforcement. You just get a bunch of gold. The 5 costs could be good. You could get Smolder, you could get Zareth, but overall it just does not seem very good. So I actually think that it might be long distance pals, or Soju could gamble and roll long distance pals. But at least this is like somewhat playable. I guess I just want to be happy about taking it here. If it were me, I'd probably just reroll those long distance pals and then complain about my luck. I'm actually really curious if Soju ends up picking this or rerolling it. Okay, Soju ends up picking it. Roll the dice for a opportunity to make his money back and some more. It's a really good charm. And so he actually ends up linking his Hui and his Mordekaiser. But this ends up being sort of difficult because his spark is now really far away from his Hui. And so now he doesn't actually benefit from having the spark nearby the Hui. If he had high voltage, the augment that enables the spark to get a couple of extra hexes of range, it'd actually probably be much more acceptable to take long distance pals. That being said, it looks like his board power is just so high, and he makes up for it by just having way more stats. Go ahead and rewind here for a quick sec here. Actually, look at how much physical damage Quay is also doing. It's actually basically comparable to Ezreal. So, you know, it's actually interesting that long distance pals is boosting the Hui both in a way that I didn't expect it to be relevant. Oh, Major Wish and dummies. Actually, I don't believe these dummies impact exiles. It's just that the dummies themselves won't get exiles. But a little bit of a positioning puzzle here for Soju. So Soju caught in an awkward spot of how he positions, but I believe he should get the shield. He's also giving long distance pals to his back line. And yeah, it does look like they get the shields onto the units for exiles anyways. So that ends up being a nice little quality of life change in recent times. Soju rolled below 50, so it's a little bit suboptimal for his econ. Ends up losing this fight. And you can see he's a little bit deflated. I think that this fight was pretty crucial for him to continue to keep his momentum because there's a pretty good chance that he would roll really heavily on 4-5, get Hui 3, and then keep that streak momentum. But losing that is a little bit of an inconvenience there. I think you start working on Ezreal items, so bow or glove is entirely reasonable. I like bow a lot better for Ezreal since you can go for Giant Slayer or you can go for red buff. Actually, one thing that might be really interesting is should you go for red buff even though you have Sunfire? And I think the answer is yes, because you end up having Sunfire that applies to only like 1 or 2 frontline units, and then it doesn't really have a lot of impact on the back line. And red buff not only hits like more units because of Ezreal's AoE, but also it amplifies his damage and gives him attack speed. So I kind of like it. And the other element is if you end up finding a glove, you can go for Last Whisper to just have a little bit more armor reduction. So that way Ezreal can do more damage. I think this fight kind of show you that he actually has a damage problem. He can't actually deal with things like Neela. Like the fight lasted for a pretty good while, and I wasn't anywhere close to killing Neela. So he definitely needs to both hit Hui 3 and develop more damage. Rolls a little bit here, stops at 7-7. Trying to experiment with different positioning patterns with long distance pals. As you can see, he's kind of struggling with, finding ways to make this not feel so awkward. I kind of actually like the idea of buffing the Mord and the Hui, but the Exiles just gets in the way. Like, if you actually had no Exiles, you could actually just have, like, Mordekaiser and Hui, like, here and, like, spread everything else out, and it should be fine. But Exiles does provide quite a big logistical issue. Ooh, man. Okay, so Soju's starting to fall off. He's lost 3 in a row, 66, so it's starting to be a little bit concerning. It's partly because in Stage 4, he's just stuck on 2 stars of his board versions, and he just needs to hit the 3 stars. He scouts around and he sees that some of his units are contested. I think there's, like, Hui boards out. There's a really scary Ari reroll. There's a couple of really powerful other boards around Rise and Varus. So a lot of people are getting online. But I do expect Soju to send here. Bunch more gold for gold subscription. Soju has sticky fingers, but he actually has an even amount of components, meaning that if he doesn't buy this charm, he's still going to be able to make 2 full items. Usually you buy this charm, sticky fingers, if you are floating an extra component. Oh, a little bit too slow. He also has Dragon for next round. He actually has an interesting option of locking it or just buying it right now for the next fight. If he buys it for the next fight, he sees the next shop. But if he locks it, he gets to, quote, save a gold. I say quote because technically that next shop could also have his Hui. Oh, is he gonna skip the dragon? Oh, wow. That's actually really interesting because a lot of people feel like that dragon is so huge that you would rather just buy it to get the guaranteed win. Soju's come across the salvager turn, and that lets him like remake his items across the board. He can go for, he can actually get the Sunfire off now. Oh, wow. Wow, very, very hard turn. Oh my gosh, he has to go quickly. Double stone plates? And then red buff IE. Ah, okay. You can Warmog something else. I think I would actually prefer Warmogs on the Mordekaiser, but he had to go really quickly. There's also a possibility that it was actually supposed to be Bramble and Dragon's Claw to be a little bit more efficient because Exiles doesn't allow him to get Stoneplate value. But I think that this ends up being fine. Like, it's totally acceptable. Okay, and there's Mordekaiser 3, and there is Hui 3. And so Soju is in a really good spot now. I just realized that part of the awkward thing with his itemization is that he only put 2 items onto Hui. So he's going to actually need to recover and get a full item here for Hui. So something that's slightly suboptimal, by the way, he actually did a salvage turn. He's just playing 2 item carries. But he has Bis Ezreal, and he has like close to Bis Hui for the first 2 items. As long as he just gets like any generic AD and AP, like there's just no way he can get screwed on this carousel, right? He can just kind of take a bunch of different options here. Jewel Gauntlet, but it's on a Morgana. I'm probably not going to get that. Archangel Staff, also entirely reasonable here. He's actually thinking about Archangel Staff over Jewel Gauntlet, probably because he wants just the raw AP source. Also, he's playing Long Distance Pals, and Long Distance Pals actually transfers scaling stats in the middle of the fight. So if you get, 0, 20, 40, 60 AP, you're sharing that AP that you're getting in the middle of the fight with the Long Distance Pal. That also applies to things like Titan's Resolve and other things that stack up stats, maybe like Seeker's Arm Guard ends up being like surprisingly a really good artifact for this augment. I actually don't have confirmation that that's true, but I was just using examples of things that like gain numbers and stats. It doesn't necessarily work for like Rageblade though, because all you get is attack speed, and Long Distance Palace shares like, resistances and ADAP. Oh, this Gwen is kind of scary actually. Oh man, I think we barely lose this fight. This Neela Keepers setup has been kind of problematic against us. We just don't have the DPS to like burst down the Neela that quickly, and they pick apart our board. I do think that part of it is a little bit of the fact that we still get Exiles, and so we're kind of tempted to like position in a way that makes Exiles favorable for us to get value, but at the same time it kind of makes it less efficient for focus firing. We level, and we're kind of conflicted on whether or not we want to Arcana Charm the Tahm Kench versus the Hecarim. I kind of like the Hecarim a little bit more, to be honest. He gets, a little bit of HP for this. It's like 100 HP or so. Like maybe 120 HP on his board, which is decent. But I think that getting the durability and the attack damage might actually be more valuable now that we have Ezreal 3. Looks like it's good enough, though, and to be fair, it feels like any charm would be good. If he had a little bit more HP against the Neela fight, he probably would have won that. If he had durability and extra attack damage on those units, that also probably would have worked out. Ultimately, though, we want to go for Xerath over this because I think we want to get the true damage, and we've been buying a ton of charms. One thing really nice about reroll comps is that you buy a lot of charms, and so having Xerath, or if you play like other reroll comps like Veigar, ends up being really good. He buys the free shops every 2 seconds for 20 seconds, so he gets, a bunch of free rolls. He's not going to chase Rumble 3. He's purely just looking for Tahm Kench 2, hits it. That's really big. Now, the icing on top is Xerath, if he's able to hit it. He puts on Nora instead, which I think is entirely reasonable because Nora ends up shielding and giving more stats to Ezreal. I like Deathblade here. Oh, he goes Guardbreaker. Interesting. Oh, is it because Guardbreaker also shares stats with Hui, and it's also a crit item? Like Guardbreaker and Infinity Edge maximizes his crit. They both use glove components, and so the extra damage there kind of completes Ezreal's crit chance. I can see it. I think Deathblade is actually just like a lot stronger though, 1-to-1. So that's probably what I was thinking about. I mean, I think both are okay. I think Deathblade is probably better in the stats. Actually, I'm very confident it's better in the stats, but in this situation, I think either's okay. And now the game is just kind of set in stone here. He's top 3. He's very likely top 2 based on the HP count. And he's actually looking to go to 9 to play probably just another Arcana. His opponent, Darth Nub, has repositioned to the left side. And the left side is far away from Mordekaiser, so it's a little bit dicier. But we're much stronger now. We have 3-item Ezreal. We have upgraded Tom Kench. We have the Nora and the Yumi, and all that just adds up. Wow, it's actually so close. Oh my god, the lightning. And we finally beat the comp that's been terrorizing us. And that's huge because now we can actually just level and play. Oh wow, we're actually rolling. Oh, he's rolling for a combat charm. I see. So he knows he's going to level after Carousel anyways. So he rolls to get a combat charm now. Then next turn, he's going to be able to level. And even though he doesn't have much gold to roll, he's going to be able to level to play the Hecarim and just get that extra bonus and then finish the game. So Soju's just thinking, get a combat charm, secure 2 lives here, get to 9 next turn, and just make sure to buy a charm every single round. And that's also doubly so because if he ends up buying Xerath scales up the number of charms. Going up against a Varus Frostboard with Diana 2, it's a very scary Diana. It's like Bis Diana. And we thankfully had a charm that actually that buffs us a little bit because that Ghost Board looked very, very powerful. Do you want to deny Frost here? Oh, it's a Xerath with a Shojin. Okay. I mean, that's really good. So now you can level and play Xerath. You can actually even just replace the Nora as well and try to go for 3 Arcana. And he levels, and now he rolls for Charm. He has 15 Charms, so that's a bunch of bonus damage. Shojin usually goes on Xerath. I think he's just wondering if he needs the CC. Oh, wait, he already bought his charm. I apologize. You can always tell if you have the charm through the icon here. Also, a little fun fact, there's a charm icon here that your little legend is holding to indicate that you have a charm. Also, it shows what kind of charm you have if you are a hyper nerd, and you kind of know exactly from that visual. Oh, God, Ezreal just entered and got snipped by Gwen. Oh, this is not a good fight for us. Okay. I don't think Mordekaiser wins this, does he? We're down to our last life. This warrior build is looking pretty scary. Oh my god, 1-star champion star up, and you get to... Oh my gosh, that's a really big one. And that's another big benefit of playing Xerath for these cap situations, is that you get all these extra powerful charms. I wonder if in some way he would ever be tempted to long distance pals Xerath and Hui. It's just so complicated. But the most important thing is that he puts his Mordekaiser in the center, and that way he is equipped to kind of get aggro and make sure this Ezreal is a little bit safer. All right, this 2-star is looking way better, and that'll do it. K3soju, another 1.x masterclass. So there you have it. That's the blaster tech that Soju is popularizing and is taking over the North American ladder. So be on the lookout and get the games in while you can before it becomes too contested. If you want more information, check out our stuff at TFT Academy, where we have the tier list. And I'm pretty sure this composition is going to improve a lot from when we initially ranked it. So definitely check it out of all the changes live on the website, tftacademy.com. Let me know if you guys have any tech about the comp below in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.